Hello there, and welcome to SCS 514, which is a course on world religions here at Unity Institute and Seminary. I'm Reverend Dr. Jesse Tanner, and in this current video, I'm going to be discussing some basic understandings of religion, dealing with questions like, what is religion? What does it mean for someone or for something to be called religious? Why should we study religion in the first place and know about the beliefs and practices of world religious traditions around the globe? In other words, in this video, we'll be looking at fundamentals, beginning to establish a basis and a purpose for our study. But we'll also be beginning to formulate a working definition of religion so that we know what we're talking about and we know what we're referring to when we're talking about religion and the religious. So it's not just an academic exercise. It's that, of course, but there's also a very practical consideration involved, a way of getting ourselves sort of all on the same page as we move forward. So why study religions? What's the point of that? Why should a course on world religions be included in any educational program, whether we're talking about university, college, or seminary? Well, in my estimation, there are perhaps countless reasons for studying world religions, especially if we're going to talk about the reasons each individual person might give for engaging in religious study. But from a more public, you might say, philosophical or theological perspective, I've distilled three primary underlying reasons why a critical and careful study of world religions is important. First of all, there's historical learning. Historical learning. In order to understand where we are today as a society and as a part of the human race, we must gain some idea of where we've come from. So this is a very clearly historical question. And it's one of the central purposes and benefits of historical investigation. It's that it allows us to learn about and gain a deeper, clearer insight into the past and all the circumstances and situations that have come together to help shape the present in which we live now currently. The Spanish philosopher George Santayana, who was living and writing in the late 19th, early 20th century, he wrote a treatise called The Life of Reason. And in that treatise he stated, quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Perhaps you've heard that aphorism before. But we could study the history and phenomena of, well, basically anything. So why religion? Why religion in particular? Well, for better or for worse, religion is and has been, across time and place, history and cultures, one of the most central and influential forces motivating human existence. Religion has always been at the forefront of human history because it has a deep and penetrating impact on people's motivations and their decisions and actions in the world. And that's not just at the individual level, but at the societal level as well. So we can't study any place, time, or event in history without running into some religious factor, some religious element that's involved, usually involved in a significant, substantial way. However, as a principal force or a shaping factor in human existence, religion has been used like any other thought, any other tool or technology, for good as well as ill, for benevolent and malevolent ends, and in life-affirming as well as life-destroying ways. So we can't forget that. There are both sides of that coin. Some people emphasize one side or the other. The new atheists, for instance, and many secular humanists stress religion as a major source of evil and violence in the world, that not much good can really come of it. Think about all the wars, and genocide, political tumult, acts of violence that are done in the name of religion. And yet, that's only one side of that coin, isn't it? Many thinkers and theologians across the board emphasize the powerful and the positive effects that religion can and has brought individuals, communities, and societies, whether we're talking about personal, spiritual transformation to whole societies being advanced and cultivated because of the religious meaning and values that are brought forth. Of course, we acknowledge religion has been used by countless people to spread malevolence and mischief across the earth. And this is the thing to which its critics point, to claim that religion itself is evil. But those critics often fail to acknowledge the tremendous virtue and benefit that religion has inspired throughout the centuries of human history. Religious beliefs and practices inspire billions of people around the world today to live honest, decent, peaceable lives. Faith-based charities of every religious tradition have brought comfort and hope and healing to millions of people around the world who would otherwise starve or lay homeless or be left to fend for themselves. Religion gives comfort and consolation to so many who have faced various adversities in their lives, whether it be suffering an illness or trying to recover from a natural disaster or simply the loss of someone who they loved. Religion has done as much, if not more, good throughout human history, and this reality cannot and ought not be dismissed by critics of religion. We keep that in mind. Secondly, when we come to talking about why should we study religion, there's the reason of understanding others. We study religion to understand other cultures, other people. Today, more than ever before, we find ourselves face to face with people from different cultures and different faith traditions. You might say the world is sort of getting smaller in a metaphorical sense. Developments in technology and communication and transportation have had this monumental effect of bringing people together from diverse backgrounds and identities. Just in the United States, the past half century has brought a drastic change in the religious landscape of this country. There's no doubt that Christianity certainly dominates nearly 80% of the population in the U.S., but there are more people of various religions from around the world than anywhere else in the world. As the religion scholar Diana Eck states, she runs the Harvard University's Pluralism Project, and she claims, quote, "The United States is the most religiously diverse nation in the world." And that's probably not overstated. This increased diversity that I'm talking about has led to people encountering and conversing and interacting with other people who hold radically different religious and spiritual ideas about the world that we all share. Whether it's in college classrooms, in the academy, whether it's at the mall or in the grocery store or at PTA meetings, people from different religions are interfacing more than ever, which is creating a situation of growing plurality and interfaith relations. And these circumstances allow us the unique opportunity to learn about religious others, not only through interpersonal dialogue, but also through what we're doing in this course, a kind of systematic, organized study. Religions prescribe worldviews. A worldview is a way of seeing and understanding the world. And religions provide answers to the profound questions that humankind has asked in every culture. Where do we come from? Why are we here? What happens when we die? What is the meaning and the purpose of life? And how do we go about finding and experiencing that meaning and purpose? In order to understand others, we must make sense of their worldviews, as well as the aspirations and the motivations that are inherent in their religious matrix. So studying world religions provides a kind of groundwork for grasping these basic beliefs, values, and practices of people from different religions. And it allows us to become better informed and more knowledgeable when we interact with people in our context of increasing religious plurality and diversity. And also, another reason to study religions or study world religions is to understand ourselves. Studying other people's religious worldviews can give us a clearer awareness of our own religious worldviews. One of the pioneers of the academic scientific study of religion, Max Mueller, he once wrote, "He who knows one religion knows none. He who knows one religion knows none." So examining other worldviews, other religious traditions, other beliefs and practices helps us kind of hone an aptitude or an ability to recognize the value and the uniqueness of our own religion and our own faith perspective. And we do this through sort of comparison and differentiation. But it also helps us to discover the boundaries and the limitations or the weaknesses of our own way of seeing and being and living in the world. In our current postmodern context, it's becoming well established that nobody knows everything about anything. Let me repeat that. Nobody knows everything about anything. And this is one of the benefits, this is one of the lessons that postmodernism has taught us. But in the process of interacting with the religious heritages of others, whether it's face-to-face or studying it in a book, we sort of naturally confront our own beliefs and practices and assumptions in a new way and in greater depth. And we are challenged to think more expansively and dialogically about our own worldview, our own religious tradition, our own spirituality. So studying world religions is important for three basic reasons. Number one, it helps us to discover our historical roots, to shed light on the present so that we can more responsibly and in an informed way move into the future. But it also allows us to better understand other people who don't share our own religious worldviews. And three, it paves the way for greater self-reflection, helping us to achieve clearer personal and communal self-understanding. So those are some of the reasons that you might engage in the study of religion. Now the question becomes, what is religion? What do we mean when we say that something is a religion or something is religious? I mean, people have been discussing the meaning of religion for thousands and thousands of years. The ancient and medieval Egyptians, Greeks, the Chinese and Indians all had sages and wisdom teachers who analyzed their own and others' religions. But it really wasn't until modernity in the West, in the Western world, after the Enlightenment and during the scientific revolutions, that scholars and the academic environment began to attempt a systematic and a critical description of religion as a universal human phenomenon. So it's important to note that the effort to define the religious as a distinct and separate realm from all other parts of human life is primarily a modern, scholarly, Western concern that originated in the universities and the educational institutions in Europe. So this divide between the religious and the secular realms is not, it's only come about in Western culture in academic circles in the modern world. As theologian and ethicist John Milbank put it in the opening words to his work that's called Theology and Social Theory, he says, once there was no sacred. Once there was no secular. Once there was no secular. And that's a fact. That's a fact that there was a time when there was no such thing as religion differentiated and understood separately from the rest of human life, or today what we would call the secular realm. That distinction between the sacred and the secular, between religion and the rest of human life, is recent. Religion seems to defy adequate, inclusive, and comprehensive definition. Some people have even called defining religion a fool's errand. It's certainly a tricky business, this attempt to pin down what religion is. But nonetheless, in order to talk about world religions and to communicate to each other about these things that we call religion, we need to at least cultivate a working understanding of what we mean when we use that word. Otherwise, there's going to be more misunderstanding than understanding. So I'd like to begin to kind of discuss a working definition. Although there's no one definition is going to be completely adequate, and no one is certain of the origins of religion. As I mentioned before, this term religion itself is invented by Western intellectuals in order to have a convenient way of studying and analyzing these beliefs and practices that we call religion. But I find that looking to the etymology or the linguistic origins of a concept can be really, really helpful. So religion can be traced back to the Latin word religare, re meaning again, and ligare meaning like a ligament. It's referring to binding or some kind of connection. So this word religare was actually a library term at first. It was alluding to this process of binding or tying together pages in a book. And so the idea here is that religion is a way of reconnecting or rebonding with God, or the source of life, or with the sacred or divine or the universe, or other terms and notions of divinity. My main point is that religion is extremely complex and difficult to define, at least in clear and precise terms. So many of us might at first glance think, oh, I know what religion is, I know what it's all about. But when we start to take a closer look, a more critical and detailed look at the concept of religion, it can sometimes slip through our fingers. We often think we know what we mean by a term or a concept until we begin to try to explain it and reflect on it. Then we realize it's not as clear-cut, perhaps. So these are three basic types of understanding about what religion is and what religion's all about. Number one, there is a common prevalent assumption that we all have an inner core of experience and belief that's somehow expressed publicly and outwardly through practices. And so this assumption has inspired a number of thinkers who put forth what we might term an essentialist position about religion. And they are essentialists because they maintain that religion, the word religion, names the outward behaviors that are inspired by this inner thing that we call faith. So there's the popular self-identity that says, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And implicit here is the assumption that organizations, systems, institutions that are associated with religions, like regulations, hierarchies, rituals, group identity, and so on, that these are merely secondary, that they're secondary and not essential. What's important is the inner realm of faith or spirituality. That's the essence. But others have used the term religion for what they consider to be sort of curious areas of observable human behavior, which requires some type of explanation. So these type of people form theories to account for why it is that people think, for example, that some invisible force is part of existence or part of their existence. That there's some inner invisible thing called the soul that outlives the body, or that there are powerful entities like gods and goddesses that are in charge of the universe, or that there's realms of being that can't be observed or measured or evaluated empirically. So these types of theories are what we call functionalism or functionalists. And functionalists seek to determine the social, the psychological, or political role played by the things that we refer to as religion. And so this position claims that religion names a system of communal organization that helps individuals and groups understand and sort of reproduce and further and advance themselves. Now, one last major way of understanding what religion is all about is oftentimes called the family resemblances approach. And this is quite distinct from the essentialist and functionalist ideas of what religion is. This position is associated with the philosophy of a guy named Ludwig Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein, who lived in the late 19th, early 20th century, he put forth a theory called family resemblances. And this approach to religion assumes that nothing is defined by simply one essence or function. Religion can't be reduced to an essence or to one function, one overarching meta principle, like with the other two views. Rather, just as members of a family more or less share similar traits, both physical and personality traits, so do the many religions of the world share a series of sort of characteristic traits that link them all together. And none of these individual traits is equally distributed across all members of the groups that we call a family or a religion. But we can begin to discern if a group falls into this category when many or most of these characteristic traits are present. So this allows the recognition of similarities, commonalities, and congruencies among religious traditions, but without diminishing the distinctions and the differences and the uniquenesses of each particular tradition. And so this family resemblances approach is the model or framework of understanding the definition of religion that will be used in this course. Religions and religious experiences are so many and so different from one another that this suggests the word religion can't really stand for one single principle, one essential thing, but it rather refers to a collection of phenomena, a network, a matrix across the spectrum of humanity that show similar characteristics. So this concept of religion points to many different groups of people sharing beliefs, values, and rituals in common within a community that resemble one another or that have trends in common but are nonetheless still distinct and variant from one another. And we might think of some corollaries or analogies here. Think of language, for instance. It's an interesting example. Languages are many and varied, no doubt. Languages all fall into a category called language, with cognitive and communicative traits that are held in common. But each language is individual. It has its own mode of articulation with a particular alphabet and phonics, grammatical system, syntax, spelling, etc. And there are even variations within an individual language or system itself. German, Arabic, Hindi, and Vietnamese are all very unique and different from each other, but all are language systems that are used to communicate verbally within a group of people. Another analogy might be music, right? There are different genres and styles and modes of melodic expression, but all of them fall under the same category of music. And so that's kind of what we're talking about here with religion. So there is a recognizable tension here. There's a tension between, on the one hand, forming a definition of religion that's wide enough or general enough to include all religious phenomena, to not leave anything out. But on the other hand, getting a definition that's narrow and specific enough to deal with the particulars and details of religious life, to set it apart from what isn't religion or what isn't the religious dimension of life. So if you try to include too much, then the definition suffers from being watered down, too generic, too wide-ranging, so that the uniquenesses and individuality of each religion is lost. For example, take the statement, religion is the human search for meaning. Some people have tried to define religion that way. Religion is the human search for meaning. Well, while this may actually be valid and true in describing religion and in human experience, but it's still too broad. This definition could include things that we normally wouldn't think of as religion. Think of physics or philosophy. They would fall into that category, and so would things like art and music. They're part of that human search for meaning. But are these really what we're talking about when we say religion? I mean, those things can be a part of religion, but that's not exhaustive. It's too broad. However, if we try to narrow our scope too much and include all the details and the unique qualities of a certain religion or a grouping of religions into the definition, it'll end up excluding other beliefs and practices that we may want to include, that do actually deserve to be called religion. For instance, take the definition, religion is about relationship with God. Religion is about relationship with God. This is simply too narrow. It's too constricted because there are traditions of belief and practice out there that don't include relationship with a God, with a capital G. And all the monotheistic assumptions that come with that. I mean, there's a bias inherent in that definition that comes from monotheism. Take Buddhism, for example. It's a religion that is quite apathetic and agnostic about God and a relationship with God. These aren't really concerns for the vast majority of Buddhists. So that definition would exclude Buddhism. And Buddhism is something that we would probably reasonably want to include in our definition of religion. So that definition doesn't work. So from all of this, sort of the moral of the story, the gist, is that the word religion and its definition likely tell us more about the one using the word than it does about the thing itself. And it also tells us that defining religion is far from simple, straightforward, and easy. As we continue on our quest to define religion, it might be helpful to encounter the many various methods and perspectives in studying and interpreting what religion is and what constitutes something being religion or religious. So I alluded to just previously 3 general tendencies of understanding, but looking at more specific methodologies could be quite helpful. So early modern Western definitions in the realm of scholarship tended to emphasize this sharp distinction between religious and non-religious parts of culture, and usually equated religion with beliefs or a belief system of some kind, especially beliefs in a supreme being, namely God. Some came along later and criticized that understanding. By the 18th century, under the influence of Romanticism, which was a cultural movement, many scholars began to shift from an emphasis on the conceptual and the ideal to the more intuitive and more experiential in defining what we mean by religion. So religions were said to be constituted by a feeling of absolute dependence on God. And that was proposed by a theologian named Friedrich Schleiermacher. Or perhaps religions were the enthusiastic temper of espousal, which has a kind of ring to it. And that's affirmed by William James. So this enthusiastic temper of espousal to the sacred that's greater than oneself is William James's sort of eloquent, although kind of confusing affirmation of what religion is. And so with people like Schleiermacher and William James, we see a kind of shift from an emphasis on sort of the conceptual to the more intuitive and experiential. But then, when the scientific revolutions began to happen and new forms of scientific inquiry were being developed, people started to integrate social, economic, historical, and cultural contexts in which religion is practiced. That became a part of religious study and understanding of what religion is. So these people said that religion is never an abstract set of ideas or values which are sort of apart from the total social, cultural, historical situation that people live in. Rather, beliefs and customs and rituals can only be understood by looking at their contexts and the concrete circumstances of human existence. Today, if we look at the study of religion today, we can find about 4 primary methodologies that are used in the realm of religious studies or in religious studies departments and in theology schools. One is the anthropology of religion. Anthropological study approaches religion as an aspect of culture. Religious beliefs and practices are important because they are central to the ways in which we as humans organize our lives. They shape our understanding of our place in the world, and they determine how we relate to one another and to the natural order. And so the main concern in anthropology is to document what people think and do, rather than determine what they ought to believe or how they should behave. The work is strictly descriptive rather than prescriptive. And so some of the more prominent anthropologists of religion have been Mary Douglas, who raised attention to the symbolic aspects of ritual and sacrifice in religion, and also the structuralist named Claude Lévi-Strauss, who sought to demonstrate how certain cultural themes are universal binary opposites, like life and death, or culture and nature, or insiders and outsiders, that type of thing. But besides the anthropology of religion, we have the sociology of religion, which is very much related. It says that an understanding of religion must acknowledge that it's socially constructed and that social processes are fundamentally involved in the emergence, development, and dissemination of religious beliefs and practices. So, like anthropology, sociology is descriptive, not prescriptive, like theology or philosophy might be. One of the first sociologists of religion was none other than Karl Marx, who lived in the middle into the late part of the 19th century. For him, religion was both a form of ideology supported by ruling classes in order to sort of control the masses of people, and at the same time it was an expression of protest against that very oppression. But ultimately for Marx, religion is impotent and useless. It's, as he says, the opium of the masses. It dulls the pain of the oppressed, but ultimately stops them from revolting, which he valued. The overthrowing of the ruling classes by the proletariat. Another sociologist of religion was Emil Durkheim. And Emil Durkheim, living in the late 19th, early 20th century, he proposed that religion is a projection of society's highest values and goals. Through collective rituals, people both reaffirm their belief in the supernatural or transcendent entities like gods and angels, and they reinforce cultural bonds with one another. Besides Marx and Durkheim, there's a guy named Max Weber. Max Weber, again, living around the time of Durkheim, he emphasized how religion gives meaning to human life and society in the face of apparently arbitrary suffering and injustice. So religion is a way people deal with suffering in life and the injustice that they experience. So it brings explanation of good and bad fortune by locating them within a broader picture of reality, a wider context of understanding, which attempts to make sense out of things and sort of creates order out of experienced chaos. A really growing field of study is the psychology of religion. This method essentially uses psychological approaches and conceptions to evaluate the religious factors in human life. There's three figures that dominate this perspective, and none of them are really alive today. They're not alive. First is William James. Second would be Sigmund Freud, and the third is Carl Gustav Jung. James wrote this monumentally important treatise, it's really a classic, called The Varieties of Religious Experience, where he assembled reports of these different religious experiences that people have, and he analyzed them. He thought that religious experience was basically an individual matter and was the foundation on which religious doctrine and communal life were built. Sigmund Freud took a very different view. He wasn't quite so sympathetic. Built from his theories on what patients told him during psychoanalysis sessions, he wrote a great work called The Future of an Illusion. And that title is quite telling of his perspective. He spoke of religion as an illusion, where people were trying to fulfill their wishes and their desires for immortality and freedom and satisfying relationships and some kind of meaning. And one of his students and then eventually colleagues, Carl Gustav Jung, split with Freud on many matters, but he kind of went back to James in a way by taking a more favorable and hospitable view of religion. Jung argued that the image of God, the self, he said, existed in the psyche, or the ego, and that the process of what he called individuation, from ego-centered to God-centered life, is similar to what religions call salvation or liberation. So these early psychologists of religion reflect similar theoretical methods that are used by people in the philosophy and theology of religion disciplines, which use critical analysis and reasoning to evaluate religions to discover truth and meaning. Today, the psychology of religion is way more scientific in its approach, much more quantitative than qualitative. And the last methodology I want to mention is the phenomenological study of religion. Well, that's kind of a mouthful. Phenomenological study of religion. And this is perhaps the oldest and most foundational of these approaches I'm talking about. In general, the study of religions, as opposed to theology, which is done within a religion and from a position of faith, the study of religions is a relative newcomer to the halls of academia. But phenomenology was the first orientation. So what is phenomenology? It doesn't necessarily seek to understand the social nature of religion, and it's really not too concerned with the psychological factors involved in religious belief. Rather, phenomenology is descriptive, the classification of religious phenomena, like objects, rituals, teachings, behaviors, etc. It's much like botanists trying to classify plants and uh, identify different traits and things like that. That's sort of what the phenomenology of religion is. It's identifying the varieties of religious things as they are observed. So we see this in the work of scholars like Rudolf Otto, Mircea Eliade, Ninian Smart, uh, great, very influential people in the study of religion. Each of these thinkers produced sort of typologies for understanding religion. Different species of the religious were identified, like the prophetic versus mystical religion, linear versus cyclical worldviews, and things like that. And then after these different varieties of religion are identified, then they're critically compared, contrasted, categorized, and analyzed. A prominent phenomenological motif that we see in this approach is the presence of an awareness of the sacred or the holy in contrast to the profane. And we see this first in the work of Rudolf Otto, but then also in the works of Eliade and Smart. So the sacred is this dimension of reality that contains the highest or greatest value and meaning for a group of people. Sometimes it goes by the name of God or gods, or sometimes mythical ancestors, divine beings, ultimate principles, and the like. And the profane, I should say, is not necessarily a pejorative or negative term. The profane is simply everything else that isn't sacred, all that is not associated with the sacred realm. But this dichotomy between the sacred and the profane has been increasingly questioned by postmodern scholars because it doesn't seem to include indigenous or tribal religions as well as Asian religions, since these really don't, in their own systems, make a sharp, definitive distinction between something called holy and something called unholy. And also, sociologists and anthropologists have critiqued this idea because to them, sacredness is an ideal construct. So it's only a concept, and so it's not a genuine cultural or social reality. So those are some of the methodologies to approach study of religion today. So religious scholars today have tended to balance these competing views of religion, and kind of doing a hodgepodge, bringing different aspects together. Yes, religions are lived out in social, historical circumstances, but also they're more than this in people's lives. They're more than just that in people's lived experience of something that's sort of seems to be beyond normal everyday reality, but which can affect people's normal everyday life. Now, to sort of come full circle and to bring this video to a close, the definition of religion, at least for purposes in this class, will be along these lines. Religion is the attempt to create order and meaning in individual and communal life through culturally perceived ultimate priorities. Now that's a mouthful, so let me say that again. Religion is the attempt to create order and meaning in individual and communal life through culturally perceived ultimate priorities. In other words, religion and religions make life meaningful and coherent for individuals and groups, and this meaning is shaped through values, beliefs, concerns, and practices that are considered most important by particular cultural contexts and circumstances. So that's the working definition of what we'll be using in this class. In the next lecture, We'll be moving on to more specific characteristics of religion and religions. So here's where we'll leave it for now. Thanks for watching.